There are stories that begin with a scream. There are stories that begin with a murder. And then there are stories that begin with paperwork. The file was thin, only a few pages, yellowed with age. The cover was stamped with a date that had nearly disappeared beneath decades of dust. Most people would have walked past it without a second glance, but once you opened it, you could never quite forget what was written inside. Because according to the story contained in those pages, an entire village disappeared. Not one person, not family, not a hunting party, an entire settlement gone. And if the reports are to be believed, they vanished so completely that it was as though they had never existed at all. The story begins in the Canadian North, a place where winter can erase the world, a place where distance becomes its own kind of predator, where help can be days away, and where the silence can become so complete that a person begins to hear things they wish they hadn't. The settlement sat near Angikuni Lake, far from major towns, far from roads, far from anything most people would call civilization. The people who lived there knew the land. They knew the weather. They knew how to survive, which is why what happened next made no sense. The trapper arrived near dusk. He had been traveling for days. The cold had settled deep into his bones. The sky was already turning dark, and he was looking forward to seeing the lights of the settlement, the warmth, the sound of voices, the comfort of knowing he wasn't alone. At first, everything seemed normal. Smoke should have been rising from chimneys. Dogs should have been barking. Children should have been running through the snow. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound, no voices, only silence. The trapper slowed. Something felt wrong. He told himself it was the weather, the isolation, the darkness. But the closer he came, the more the silence began to feel unnatural. A silence so complete that it felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. The first cabin stood empty. The door was open. The fire pit was cold. Inside, belongings remained exactly where they should have been. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing appeared damaged. It looked as though the occupants had simply stood up and walked away. The second cabin was the same, and the third, and the fourth. Every structure, every room, every corner, empty. Not abandoned, emptied. The difference may seem small, but to the trapper it felt enormous, because abandoned places tell a story. This place did not. This place felt interrupted, as though whatever had happened all at once, as though an entire community had stopped what they were doing at the exact same moment and left, without a trace, without warning, without reason. The trapper searched until long after dark, and when he finally stopped, he realized something that chilled him more than the cold ever could. He had not seen a single footprint leaving the settlement. Not one. Only the wind, only the snow, only the silence, and somewhere across a frozen lake, he thought he saw a light. The trapper did not sleep that night. Years later, when people asked him why he had not simply left, he struggled to explain it. The truth was simple. The cold was brutal, the darkness was complete, and despite everything he had found, he still believed that there had to be an explanation. A hunting trip, a migration, an emergency, something, anything, something that made sense. So he chose one of the cabins, lit a lantern, and waited for morning. That decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. The first sound came shortly after midnight, a door closing, somewhere outside. The trapper sat upright. The sound was unmistakable. Wood striking wood, a cabin door. Someone was outside. Relief washed over him. Finally, a survivor. Someone who could explain what happened. He grabbed his lantern and stepped into the darkness. The village stood silent beneath the moonlight. Snow drifted through the air. The cabins looked exactly as they had before. Empty, motionless, dead. Then he heard it again. A door closing. This time from further away, on the opposite side of the settlement. The trapper walked toward it, his boots crunching through the snow, the lantern swinging in his hand. The closer he came, the more certain he became that someone had to be there. But when he reached the cabin, the door stood open. Nobody inside. Nobody outside. Only darkness. Then he noticed something strange. Tracks. Fresh tracks. Not animal tracks. Human footprints. A single set. Leading away from the cabin. The trapper followed them. The footprints crossed the village, passed between buildings, moved toward the frozen shoreline. Then stopped. Not faded. Not covered by snow. Stopped. As though whoever made them had simply ceased to exist. The trapper stared at the final print for several seconds, then looked up and saw the lights. Across the frozen lake, far in the distance, small orange lights burned against the darkness. Not one, many, too many. The trapper counted 6, then 8, then 12. They flickered softly, like lanterns or fires, or windows glowing in the night. His first thought was relief. The villagers, they had relocated. They were gathered somewhere on the far side of the lake. The mystery was solved. But something about the lights bothered him. They were perfectly still, not moving, not swaying, not changing, just waiting. Morning arrived. The trapper left immediately. By the time he reached the nearest outpost, he was exhausted. He reported what he had found. The abandoned settlement, the empty cabins, the tracks, the lights. Most people dismissed the story at first, but eventually word spread. And before long, an investigator was sent north to examine the claims. His name appears only once in the surviving legend. Inspector Henry Ward. Whether he existed exactly as described remains uncertain. But in the story, he becomes the last man to see the village before everything becomes impossible. Ward arrived 2 weeks later. The settlement remained empty. Nothing had changed. No signs of violence, no signs of disease, no signs of relocation. The cabins remain exactly as the trapper described. Meals unfinished, tools abandoned, personal belongings untouched. It looked less like a village that had been abandoned and more like time had stopped. Ward spent 3 days documenting everything. Every structure, every room, every detail. His reports were methodical, professional, skeptical. Until the 4th night, that was when his journal changed. Entry 17. The lights have appeared across the lake. The trapper's description was accurate. Approximately 12 visible sources, possibly lanterns. Distance difficult to determine. Will investigate tomorrow. Entry 18. Observed lights again. Curious detail. They appear unchanged in position, despite several hours of observation. Will attempt approach at sunrise. Entry 19. Walk toward lights for approximately 2 hours. Distance never changed. Return to camp. Extremely unusual. Will repeat tomorrow. By this point, Ward's writing begins to deteriorate. The sentence becomes shorter, less confident, more personal, almost frightened. Entry 21. Observed movement. Thought I saw figures. Cannot confirm. Entry 22. The lights are closer tonight. Entry 23. I know how that sounds. Entry 24. I measured the distance yesterday. I measured again today. They have moved. The remaining entries become increasingly difficult to read. The handwriting grows erratic. Certain words are crossed out repeatedly. One phrase appears over and over again. Not underlined, not emphasized, repeated, as though Ward was trying to convince himself it was true. We are alone. We are alone. We are alone. Then finally, one final entry, written in shaky handwriting. Entry 27. There are no lights tonight. I wish there were. And below that, one final sentence. The last thing he ever wrote. Something crossed the lake. Inspector Ward was never the same after entry 27. The men traveling with him noticed it immediately. He slept less, spoke less, and spent long periods staring across the frozen lake, sometimes for hours, sometimes through entire nights, watching, waiting, as though he expected something to return. Whenever they asked what he was looking for, his answer was always the same. The lights. Nothing more, nothing less, just the lights. The problem was that the lights had vanished. For nearly 2 weeks they had appeared every night, always in the same place, always burning across the frozen lake, always impossible to reach. Then suddenly, they were gone. And according to Ward, that was far worse, because the lights had never frightened him. The darkness beyond them did. 3 nights after entry 27, one of the men awoke screaming. The others rushed to his bunk. They found him sitting upright, sweating, shaking, unable to speak. For nearly an hour, he simply pointed toward the lake. Finally, he managed to say 4 words. I saw people walking. The others looked outside. Nothing. Only darkness. Only snow. Only the frozen surface of the lake stretching endlessly into the night. The man refused to leave his bunk afterward. By morning, he demanded to be sent home. Ward denied the request. Something about the investigation had changed. He was obsessed now, convinced they were close to discovering the truth. That afternoon, they found tracks, fresh tracks, human, appearing near the shoreline. The men followed them immediately. The prints moved out onto the ice, single file, one after another, stretching toward the center of the lake. Then something impossible happened. The tracks changed direction, not turned, changed, as if whoever made them had suddenly begun walking backward. The left foot became the right, and the right became the left. The pattern reversed. One of the investigators laughed nervously. Someone's playing a trick. Nobody answered, because everyone could see the same thing. The tracks did not lead away. They did not lead toward camp. They simply stopped, halfway across the frozen lake, as though whoever made them had stepped out of the world. The night the storm arrived, the wind screamed across the ice. Snow battered the cabins. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The men gathered inside. Nobody wanted to admit they were frightened, but they were, even Ward, especially Ward, because shortly before sunset, he had discovered something hidden beneath one of the abandoned cabins. A journal, old, frozen, partially ruined by moisture. Most pages were unreadable, but a few remained intact. The handwriting belonged to someone from the village, and every surviving entry described the same thing. The lights across the lake, the lights that appeared every winter, the lights nobody could reach, the lights the elders warned people to never follow. One entry stood out. A single sentence written again and again across the entire page, like a desperate warning. They are not fires. They are not fires. They are not fires. The storm intensified. Midnight arrived, and then someone knocked on the cabin door. Once, the room froze. Nobody moved. Everyone looked toward the entrance. Another knock. Slow, deliberate. A long pause followed. Then a third. Ward stood. His face had gone pale. One of the men whispered, "Who would be out there?" Nobody answered, because they all knew. There should have been nobody, not for hundreds of miles. Ward approached the door, his lantern trembling in his hand. The cabin became completely silent. The wind seemed to disappear. The storm vanished. The world itself felt as though it had stopped breathing. Slowly, he opened the door. Outside stood only darkness. No figure, no traveler, no animal, nothing. Just snow. The men exhaled, relief washing through the room. Then Ward looked down, and his expression changed. There, directly outside the door, was a single footprint, fresh, deep, perfectly formed, facing the cabin. The footprint had not approached. There were no tracks leading toward it, no tracks leading away, just one footprint. As if someone had appeared from nowhere, taken a single step, and stopped. Nobody slept. By dawn, two men were openly begging to leave. Ward refused again. He believed they were close to understanding what had happened to the village, close to understanding the lights, close to understanding the tracks. That decision would cost him everything. The following night, the lights returned. Only this time they were different. There were hundreds of them, covering the ice, stretching from one side of the lake to the other. Rows upon rows of orange lanterns, silent, motionless, watching. The men stood frozen. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then one of them noticed something. The lights were not floating. They were being carried. Shapes stood beneath every lantern. Human shapes, tall, thin, motionless, far too many to count, standing shoulder to shoulder across a frozen lake, facing the camp, watching. One of the investigators began praying. Another started crying. Ward simply stared, unable to look away, because he finally understood what had been bothering him from the beginning. The lights had never been moving. They had always been approaching, very slowly, every night, getting closer, and nobody had noticed until now. Then every lantern went out at once. The lake vanished into darkness. The figures disappeared. The man ran from the cabins, barricading doors, covering windows, terrified. The next few hours were chaos, screams, crashing furniture, voices shouting through the storm, then silence. Total silence. When rescue finally arrived, days later, the camp was empty. The investigators were gone, all except one. A single man was discovered hiding beneath a bunk, barely conscious, his beard white with frost, his eyes fixed on the door. He never fully recovered, but years later he reportedly gave one final statement. Only one. 6 words. The last known words connected to the Angie Cooney legend. They were waiting for us. Nobody ever discovered what happened to Ward. Nobody ever explained the tracks. Nobody ever explained the lights. And nobody ever proved what happened at Angie Cooney Lake. Perhaps it was only a legend, a northern ghost story, a tale that grew larger with every retelling. Or perhaps On certain winter nights, when the wind falls silent and the ice stretches unbroken beneath the moon, there is another village standing across the lake. A village where lanterns burn, where people wait, and where every light is watching for someone new to arrive. Because the most terrifying possibility is not that the village disappeared. The most terrifying possibility is that it never left. And nobody ever proved what happened at Ajikuni. And nobody ever proved what happened at Ajikuni. And nobody ever proved what happened at By this point, Wart's writing begins to deteriorate. By this point, Wart's writing begins to deteriorate. By this point, Wart's writings begin to deteriorate. By this point, Wart's writing begins to deteriorate. By this point, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Okay. By this point, Wart's writing oh my God, fuck.